The Rambam says in the Sefer HaMitzvahs that mitzvah 155 is the mitzvah that we are commanded to make a verbal declaration when the Shabbos comes in and when the Shabbos leaves. And the Rambam goes on to say that we must mention the greatness and exalted character of this day. And this is based on a verse in the Parsha of the week, in the Parsha of Yitro, in the Ten Commandments. For it says in the Ten Commandments, Zochar es yoim ha-Shabbos l'katshei, remember the Shabbos and sanctify the Shabbos. We remember the Shabbos with words, and therefore we sanctify the Shabbos with Kiddush. And he quotes the Mechilta as saying, remember the Shabbos day and sanctify it. And how do we sanctify it? Through reciting a blessing. And he goes on to say that the sages said explicitly, remember Kiddush over wine, and sanctify it when you enter and when you leave the day of Shabbos, and this is done by making Havdalah. And so tonight I want to discuss the mitzvah of Havdalah, how it connects with this passage, and what is the meaning of the various customs of the wine and the spices, and also the Havdalah candle, and what are the meanings behind these rituals. Let us begin by analyzing the pasuk that the Rambam brings, which is the pasuk of remember the Shabbos and keep it holy. And the Rambam says keep it holy by making Kiddush. So we understand why the pasuk connects with Kiddush, but how does this pasuk connect with Havdalah, which is seemingly leaving the Shabbos and separating the Shabbos from the rest of the week? And this is understood with the words of the Ramban. The Ramban says that in this pasuk we have two mitzvahs. The first mitzvah is Zachar, remember the Shabbos. And the second mitzvah is L'katshei, to sanctify the Shabbos. What's the difference? The mitzvah of Zachar, the mitzvah to remember the Shabbos, means to remember the Shabbos every single day of the week. Every day of the week we are to remember Shabbos. However, L'katshei, to sanctify Shabbos through the Kiddush, this is done only on the day of Shabbos itself. And therefore, the Rambam, who tells us that we have a mitzvah, not only to make Kiddush when we go into the Shabbos, but to remember the Shabbos by making Havdalah, is of the opinion that Havdalah is not necessarily a separation between the holy and the weekday. Rather, Havdalah, as it explains in many Kabbalistic and Hasidic works, Havdalah is the bridge and the interface that brings the holiness of Shabbos into the weekday. And therefore, now that we are making this Havdalah, by talking about the greatness of Shabbos, we are adding holiness, l'katshei, holiness to the Shabbos. That Shabbos is so holy that not only is it holy in its own right on the day of Shabbos, but the holiness is so great that it has the ability to perpetuate throughout all the days of the week. And that is the message and the meaning of the Havdalah, to bring that holiness of Shabbos into all the days of the week. And therefore we are told that even though during the week we are allowed to do work, and it doesn't seem to be as holy as Shabbos, so we can understand this through a parable of a father who hides an item or a toy from his child, and he tells the child, now go find it. And the same is true that after Shabbos, God hides the Shabbos in the weekday, and we have to go and search out and find the Shabbos. Therefore, to strengthen this concept, we find two interesting halachas in the Rambam. The first halacha is that you are allowed to make Havdalah Saturday day, even before the Shabbos goes out. In other words, even before you see 3 stars appear, already one may make the Havdalah ceremony. Take a cup of wine and say the bracha of Havdalah. Of course, you cannot make a candle or put on a flame on Shabbos. That you must wait till later. But the actual Havdalah ceremony through wine and the Havdalah blessing you are allowed to do on Shabbos. And the question is why? If Havdalah means separation, it separates the holy from the profane. It is not yet weekday. How can we make the Havdalah ceremony? But the answer is, as we just explained, that Havdalah is not about separating, rather Havdalah is about uniting. It brings the holiness of Shabbos into the weekday. And therefore we're allowed to make the Havdalah already on Shabbos. Furthermore, the Rambam says another halacha. Let's say you forget to make Havdalah Saturday night. You can make the Havdalah Sunday or Monday or even Tuesday. And the Rambam does not say this as a post facto, a b'di'avad, that if you forget to say it Saturday night, then okay, you'll fulfill the obligation by doing it Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. Rather, he says you are to make it Sunday or Monday or Tuesday. This is a priori. And the reason is because Havdalah is not about separating Shabbos from the weekday, which takes place Saturday night when 3 stars appear. Rather, Havdalah is about bringing the Shabbos into the weekday. And therefore we can do that even Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday. Why do we make Havdalah on wine? And why do we need a candle? And why do we smell the besamim, the incense? And how does all of this connect with our daily lives? The concept of wine, the Sefer HaChinuch tells us that the reason that we perform this mitzvah with wine is because wine brings a person to joy. In other words, by the fact that you taste the wine and you get excited with the wine and it brings a person to a spiritual high, you now remember the joy that you had on Shabbos. And by drinking the wine Saturday night, you're bringing that joy from Shabbos already into the weekday. It's interesting to note that the Siddur HaArizal tells us that there are 4 different aspects of the Havdalah. We start with making a bracha over the wine. Then we make a bracha over the besamim. Then we make a bracha over the candles. And then we make a bracha of Havdalah. And these 4 blessings represent the 4 worlds of Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, and Asiya. In other words, by making these 4 blessings, we are bringing down the holiness of the Shabbos into all the 4 worlds, including the world of action. That even the world of action is now permeated with this aura and with the holiness of Shabbos. So therefore we start with the wine to bring this sweetness and joy into the darkness of the everyday world. And then we move on to the spices. So pertaining to the spices, we find there are 2 basic reasons. Why is it that we make a bracha on the spices Saturday night? And furthermore, we don't make a bracha on spices after Yom Tif. Even though Yom Tif, like Pesach or Shavuos or Sukkot, is also prohibited in doing work, labor, yet we do not make a bracha on the spices after these holidays. So why is it that Saturday night we do make a bracha on spices? However, after Yom Tif we don't make a bracha on spices. And thirdly, when Shabbos goes into Yom Tif, for example, when Saturday night goes into Pesach, we make Havdalah, but we don't make a bracha on the spices. So the question is, why this contrast? We find two basic reasons for Besamim. Number one, it says in Tosfos that the reason why we make the bracha on the spices and we smell the spices Saturday night is because our neshama, Yeseda, the extra soul that we had on Shabbos, leaves us, and therefore because of that we feel the loss, we feel the sadness, and therefore to restore our joy we smell the incense, the spices. That's one reason. The Bach brings another reason. The Bach says that on Shabbos, not only are we forbidden from doing work, but even in heaven, they are also forbidden from doing work. And therefore, in hell, in the purgatory, which we call Gehenna, the angels don't continue to stoke the fires of the purgatory. Rather, on Shabbos, all the fires go out, and all the souls go into paradise. Saturday night, those souls that still need refinement go back into the purgatory. And right after Shabbos, they start up those fires. So when you start up a fire, there's an odor. And therefore, to remove that odor, we dull that odor with smelling these fragrant spices. And the Rebbe says that these two answers really come together and complement one the other. And only when we have these two answers together, then we need the spices. But if we have only one of these two, we don't. In other words, Saturday night, you lose the extra soul, and you also start up the fires of the purgatory. So now we need the Besamim. What happens when Shabbos goes into Yom Tif? So when Shabbos goes into Yom Tif, we also don't make a bracha on the Besamim. Why? Because even though the extra soul left us after Shabbos, however, the fires of hell or purgatory did not start up yet. So therefore, it's not enough to cause us to have the Besamim. When Yom Tif goes out, and now they start up these fires of the purgatory, because on Yom Tif you don't have an extra soul, according to the Talmud, according to Halacha and Nigla de Torah. So therefore, when Yom Tif goes out, you only have one of these two reasons, and that is they start up the fires of the purgatory. But you don't have that loss of the extra soul. And therefore, after Yom Tif, you do not have the mitzvah or the bracha on the Besamim, on the spices. So this is an answer that we can say according to Halacha, according to Nigla the Torah. But the question is, according to Kabbalah, according to the Zohar, that the Zohar says that there is a neshama yisera, an extra soul, also on Yom Tif. So the question is, why is it that when Yom Tif goes out, do we not make a bracha on the Besamim? Seemingly we also feel this sadness of the loss of the additional soul. And here too, the Rebbe goes on to explain that it's true that according to Kabbalah, there is an additional soul on Yom Tif as well. However, there are different levels of the additional soul. For example, on Rosh Chodesh, every Rosh Chodesh, we also have an additional soul. However, it's only one notch, one level up. On Chol Hamoed, the intermediate days of Passover or Sukkot, we have also an additional soul, 2 notches up. When it comes to Yom Tov, we have an additional soul, 3 notches up. When it comes to Shabbos, we have 4 notches up. So Shabbos, there's a tremendous contrast between the weekday and Shabbos. And on Shabbos itself, there are also 3 levels. There is Erev Shabbos, Shabbos afternoon. In other words, Friday afternoon going into Shabbos is the first level of the soul. Friday night, we get the second level of that soul. And then Saturday morning, Shabbos morning, we get the 3rd level. So now Shabbos morning, the Neshama Yisera, the additional soul, has reached its peak. And now, when Saturday night that soul leaves us, we have that tremendous contrast. And we feel that void and that sadness. And being that Havdalah is all about transferring the holiness of Shabbos into the weekday. We don't want there to be the taste of sadness. We don't want there to be that void. And therefore, we are required to make a blessing on the psamim, on these spices. We then move on to the flame, which is the Havdalah candle. And we know the Havdalah candle, the mitzvah is to have more than 1 wick, which has more than 1 color. In other words, that the fire has many colors and has many wicks, and therefore the blessing that we say is Boirei Ma'orei Ha'esh, on the many different fires or colors and flames of the fire. So why is it, number 1, that we make a bracha on fire to begin with, and why, number 2, must it be more than 1 wick? In contrast to Shabbos, for example, Friday afternoon, there's a mitzvah to make a blessing on lighting the Shabbos candles, and the mitzvah is primarily 1 candle. Even though it's true that married women use 2 candles, and single girls use 1 candle, and the custom is to add an additional candle for each child, for each child brings in new light into the home. However, primarily, you can fulfill the obligation of Shabbos candles even with 1 candle. Yet when it comes to the Havdalah candle, here on Saturday night, we are told that we need 2 wicks, and it must be a medura, a torch, in contrast to a candle. We look into the Medrash, and the Medrash says something very interesting. The Medrash says, what is the reason for the Havdalah candle Saturday night? And the Medrash goes on to say that Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, were sent out of paradise Saturday night. They were born and created Friday morning, and they sinned with the tree of knowledge Friday afternoon. And really at that time, God wanted to send them out of paradise. But how can you throw a Jew into the gutter Erev Shabbos? Shabbos is a day you have to be with family and friends. You have to have a good meal on Shabbos. So God waits until Saturday night. He says, you know what, Shabbos you can stay by us in paradise amongst the angels. You shall be our guest, you and your wife. However, Saturday night you're out of here. And Saturday night, Adam goes out of paradise, and this is the first time that he meets up with darkness. Up until then, he never saw darkness, because in paradise, there was no darkness. So he sees the darkness, he becomes a bit afraid, and now God implants into his mind the idea to take 2 stones and bang them together. So Adam picks up these 2 stones and he hits them together and they create a fire. This is a chodosh, a new fire. In other words, there was fire, there was light up until now, but that was a heavenly light, a divine light, a light that God created. Here, Saturday night was the first time that humankind created their own light. And therefore, to remember this light, we are told every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night, we have the obligation to start and create our own light. And therefore, we create a new light, and we hold the Havdalah candle. But why specifically 2 wicks? And why the blessing Saturday night, Boirei Me'orei Ha'esh? Why don't we make a blessing every day? When we get up in the morning, God who gave us light into the world. Yet we don't make a bracha every day. We thank God for our soul. We thank God for standing erect. We thank God for giving us shoes and clothing. But yet we don't thank God for light. The only time we make the blessing over light is Saturday night, when Adam himself created fire for the first time. And the answer is that light, and especially the light that Adam and Eve experienced that first Shabbos, was a light that was given to us by God. This is a light of Shabbos, a light of tranquility. It's really a light of passivity. We don't have to do anything. Shabbos comes and everything is automatically prepared. Ba Shabbos, ba Manucha. Comes Shabbos, comes tranquility. It's true that for 6 days we prepare. However, once Shabbos arrives, we cease from working, and now we enter into a new phase, into a new reality, into the reality of peace and tranquility. This peace and tranquility is given to us by God. It's a a godly light. For this we don't make a bracha. When are we required to make a bracha? When does the light become a flame? When does these 2 wicks become a torch? That is when man participates. When man has his intervention, now it becomes a bracha. Now it becomes a blessing. Because God is telling us that his light represents the light of Torah. When a person studies Torah, he actually feels Shabbos. The Talmud tells us that Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars, are called Shabbos. Why? Because the Torah was given on Shabbos, and therefore when you study Torah, you have a taste of Shabbos even during the weekday. Torah scholars that study all the time have Shabbos every day, and therefore they're called Shabbos. But Shabbos is a godly light. Comes Motzei Shabbos Kodesh, Saturday night. Now we are told, create your own light. And that is to bring the light of Shabbos into the weekday, into the business world, into your everyday life. That we now have the obligation and the responsibility not only to light up our godly soul, but now we also have the obligation to light up our animal soul. That everything we do throughout the week, from working to playing to vacation to eating and drinking and sleeping, everything must be permeated with the light and the warmth of Shabbos. And that's why we have a double flame. And that's why we have this torch. Because not only do we light up our godly soul, which is very active on Shabbos, but now we have to light up our animal soul as well. And therefore we make the bracha. For that's where the true blessing comes from. When a Jew has the ability to transform the physical everyday world and make it into a godly place, that is true blessing. Then God becomes joyous and God bestows all his blessings upon the individual. However, it takes action. It takes friction. You have to take the 2 stones and bang them together. God demands of every Jew avodah, which means simply work, action, toil, to go and do the mitzvahs every day of our life. And by doing this, we have the ability to bring light into our life, a light that we make a bracha upon. It's a light that brings us blessing and joy and brings us true tranquility of Shabbos and everything that we do. And so, from the Havdalah, Saturday night, we go on to say V'yitin Lecha, a special prayer that God shall give you blessings. V'yitin Lecha likim mital hashemayim mishmanei haaretz. And at the end of the V'yitin Lecha, we say, God blesses us with peace. Hashem oiz liyama yitein, Hashem yivarech esame basholem. The Talmud tells us, it's brought down in the Torah's Kohanim and Rashi, that shalom shakol keneged hakol, which means that peace is equal to all other blessings in the world. In other words, the greatest blessing is peace. It's the vessel for all of God's blessings. And therefore, through making the Havdalah, on the wine, and on the psamim, and on the candle, and the Havdalah itself, and bringing God's light down into all four worlds, we continue with V'yitin Lecha, that these blessings are now going to go into a new phase, a phase of shalom, a phase of peace. And this is actualized through the Malava Malka, through eating Saturday night the special meal, which is called Seudas Davin Malka Mashiach. It is the meal of King David, the Mashiach. What will Mashiach accomplish? Mashiach will bring peace not only to the Jewish people, but rather he will bring peace and tranquility throughout the entire world and to all the nations of the world. And so by doing this Havdalah, we bring these blessings and we give the inspiration to do the toil that we need to truly transform darkness into light and to see the ultimate light, the light of when the moon will become as great as the sun, with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.
Amen.